My uncles aren't orchids. Uncle Aby, Uncle Jacque, and Uncle Keith used to grow orchids, hundreds of them over the years. When our family visited, they had their orchids in semi-greenhouses and took care of each orchid individually, watering, pruning, feeding, and cleaning each one. The amount of attention and effort it takes to grow that many orchids is not negligible. I've tried raising an orchid. I've tried raising a garden, and I've failed lots. And I've had some success. The main reason we want to grow a garden is so that Zoe can play on the grass. It's taken 3.5 years to get something that resembles a garden. And I've learned that the more attention I pay to the garden, the better it grows. I think about Uncle Aby, Uncle Jacque, and Uncle Keith often about the attention they gave to their orchids. While I could appreciate the beauty of the gift of the flowering orchid when I was younger, I now see it in a different light. Even when a community or society or civilization is flourishing at its pinnacle, we're a savage bunch. While Egypt, Greece, Rome, and now the English and Chinese empires brought exponential progress through education, law, medicine, architecture, banking, politics, philosophy, and technology, history shows us that we are prone to taking this for granted. And worse, we are bent on destruction through our envy and pride. The law, the covenant with Moses, was given to establish God's sovereignty and to live out the idea that each human life is sovereign, which means of ultimate value. Communities that get this flourish. Communities that forget this languish. When we act out the belief in the sovereignty of God against the odds of our destructive human nature, our nature that is bent on envy, stealing, deception, cheating, arrogance, resentment, rage, malice, and pride, when we act against these and out of a belief in sovereignty, there is no limit to the good we can accomplish. In this week's reading, Jeremiah said that the Lord would make a new covenant where the law would be written in our hearts. Cultural Christianity has the law dictating good and evil, which has its benefits, great benefits, but also is a hard burden to bear. Faith in Jesus has the law inside our hearts, changing our savage nature, cultivating the good. And get this, we are always against the odds. That's inside of us and in community. Jesus explicitly reminded us of this in John chapter 17. Our Hebrews 5 reading reminds us that Jesus' ministry started with his Father's words at his baptism. Jesus was obedient to his Father's call. Even though Jesus was God's Son, Jesus learned obedience through being tortured and executed by the moral and legal authorities. All who obey Jesus, who follow in his way, who are willing to suffer, to be wrongfully accused, to be outcast, and ultimately to lose their lives, will gain their salvation. When I think about faith in Jesus, it's easy to place myself at the center. That Jesus came to save me and to make me flourish. Maybe there's some truth there. Jesus came to confront sin, to drive out Satan, the deceiver, who teaches that the Father is not good, and accused Jesus of lying about his identity. Jesus came to be executed as the final sin offering and to rise from death to be an eternal source of deliverance for those who follow and obey him. This necessarily entails personal suffering and turning away from sin and deception and turning towards worship and speaking and living truthfully. So in some important ways, I am the unit of change. Our law courts, our police, and our churches cannot govern the human heart and cannot root out sin. These institutions have an important part to play, and we need them to do their part competently, with zeal and with virtue. History shows us that these institutions from time to time have been and so will be corrupted to the point where they will venerate depravity and persecute people who live out the Judeo-Christian worldview. Ultimately, it's God's word, the gospel, the new covenant that leads us to turn away from our depravity and towards obedience to the Lord, to suffer to bring salvation. Out of dirt, through attention and nurturing potential, my uncles created beauty. So Jeremiah prophesied that the first covenant, the law, would be written in our hearts. Reverence for God's sovereignty and the sovereignty of human life would internally motivate us to bring about personal, family, community flourishing. Jeremiah's prophecy has been, is being, and will continue to be fulfilled. For millennia, Christians have failed a lot. We've been unable to confront sin and sometimes even venerated the criminally depraved. We have also, through obedience to Jesus, attention to potential, nurturing potential, and through self-sacrifice, built families, communities, and nations that have raised us out of bondage and dirt to sons and daughters. At the men's walk at our church a few weeks ago, I was chatting with our rector, Grant, about being called sons and daughters and how this is something we take so for granted. It is nothing short of the most wonderful miracle that we get to be sons and daughters of the Father. Lent is a wonderful time to consider the new covenant and to fast and center on doing one thing to live out the covenant. Father, thank you that you place the new covenant in our hearts.